Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Salma. I'm a mom of 6 children, and here on this channel we talk about intentionally parenting Muslim children and creating healthy Muslim families. All of us want to raise practicing Muslim children, right? And so one of the biggest factors is the environment. And today I'm going to show you what kind of impact the right or wrong environment can have on our children, inshallah. And we'll talk about 3 main points, okay? So let's just jump in. So I'm going to be talking about this from an Islamic perspective, obviously, but also from my own personal experience. I have moved so many times in my life, and I've lived in very, very different environments, starting from living in a Muslim country, then in a non-Muslim environment where Muslims were minority, being a refugee, being an immigrant, being an expat. So I've had a variety of experiences, to kind of back up all these claims that I'm going to be mentioning today, inshallah. All right. So as we talk about these things, as always on this channel, I'd like for you to sort of take stock of your own personal life. So almost like sit with the video and, grab a journal and kind of discuss, with yourself these points, or with your family, with your spouse, and make it practical, make it applicable. It's not just, one of those things that we mention and then, kind of forget about it. It's meant to be sort of like a workshop style kind of thing, All right. So the 3 main points we're going to be discussing today is the big picture. So we're going to talk about, the society and the culture we live in. Then we're going to talk about the social circle, and then we're going to talk about the home as a foundation. Okay, so 3 main points to remember. So number 1, the right environment starts with the place where we live, right? And so if we are living, it starts with the big question: which country are we even living in? Which kind of society do we live in? And so as we mention these things, I don't want you to kind of say, okay, we don't have a choice, I can't make these big changes. I want you to take from these 3 points whatever you are able to, okay? So some of you might be able to change the country. Some of you might be able to change the society. But if you're not, stay tuned for the other tips, right? Like there is always something you can do. So I don't want you to just kind of give up and say, well, this is what it is. I can't do anything. Raising our children is important, and raising them intentionally is important, right? And so as long as our intention is to do the best we can, inshallah, we will see the results, okay? So number 1 is to consider the society or the culture we live in. Obviously, if we live in a non-Muslim society, the effects on our children are going to be greater than we live in a Muslim society, right? And so if we live in an environment that makes it hard to practice the religion, of course our children are going to have a harder time. And so when I used to live in the West, or in predominantly non-Muslim societies, I kind of had this thought, like it would be very unfair from the children, to expect them to be these little scholars, right? And, these little sahabas, right? But I'm putting them in an environment where this is incredibly difficult to keep up, right? And so first of all, we have to make sure we as Muslims live in a society that allows us to practice our religion, the very bare minimum, right? And so even Islamically, when you cannot practice your religion, then you should move to a place where it's easier for you to practice your religion. Now, sometimes in the West, it's easier to practice, and this might be controversial, but a lot of you who have lived in Muslim lands also know that there's a lot of corruption and there is a lot of bad things happening in Muslim lands as well. So there is no easy answer here. You have to make this decision for your family and say, hey, can I live in this place where I'm at? Can I practice my religion? Is this, as a society, does this society where I'm currently in, does it support my values? Does it support the life I want to live? And, this is the big question, the big picture, right? And so if you are a young couple, you might be thinking, okay, what kind of career choices can I make that are going to land me in the right direction? Me and my husband, we used to talk about this when we first got married. We used to live in Canada, and then we talked about, what kind of careers would bring us, for example, into the Middle East, where we could raise our children in a more Muslim environment, right? And so again, so think of the big picture, think of the society, think of the culture where you're at, right? And some of you might be in Muslim lands, and then you can, some of you might be saying, well, it's not perfect here either. And it's not, but again, it makes it much easier when there are masajid, when there is adhan, when there is hijab, for children to practice these kind of things. And so if our goal is to raise practicing Muslims, we have to consider each role it plays. So the big picture is the society and the culture where we're raising these children, right? And again, I have lived in every possible variation of these things. Currently I live in the UAE, but I also used to live in Berlin, Germany. I used to live in Canada. I used to live in the US. I used to live in Saudi. I used to live in Bosnia. So it's possible to practice your religion in any of these places. Allah's earth is vast, but it's also much easier when the society and the environment supports your effort as as a parent, right? And so when you don't have to go fight against it every single day, right? So if you can kind of clear the bigger picture, that makes it much easier to do the other things, right? So you want to look at the society and the culture. Same thing within that society and within that culture, you can make small adjustments. So like if you live in an area that's known for gang activity, for example, you can make a small move and maybe move somewhere else. Just, maybe you have to sacrifice somewhere else. Maybe you have to pay higher rent. Maybe you have to cut down on your other expenses, but the safety of your children becomes a priority. If you live in an area where there's knife crime, where there is, it's not safe to be in, or if you live in an area where there's barely any Muslims, maybe you can move to a place where there's more Muslims, right? And so even within that society, you can make small adjustments that are eventually long-term going to make it easier for you to parent your children, right? So the big picture is first the society and the culture you live in. And each one of you have to evaluate that for yourself. Where do you feel a stronger Muslim? What are the things that are going to make it easier for you to practice your religion, right? So that's the big picture. The second thing is your social circle. Okay, and so the social circle, that's something that you can then, adjust after you've adjusted the big picture, right? Like the first big society and culture kind of bit. Then you can look at your environment. No matter where you are, you can look for the good practicing people, right? Like you can look for the community. And so even if you live in non-Muslim lands or in lands where the Muslims are a minority, or maybe where your culture is very strong and, traditional and maybe not as practicing, you can look for the masajid, you can look for the community centers, that talk about religion. You can look for Islamic classes. You can try to make friends online and, connect with people that are practicing. So you look for a social environment that you're going to create where your children are going to have like-minded friends, where you're going to have like-minded families coming to visit you, where you're going to kind of engineer that environment so your kids don't feel like they're the only ones, right? And so no matter where you move, you can find some practicing people, right? Like no matter where you are, you can connect, you can find the masjid, you can find the classes, right? And so you want to create a social circle for your children, right? Where they are going to be feeling like their values are respected and like their values matter, right? So if they are friends with people that are not practicing, it's going to be very hard, right? And again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but all these things are going to make it harder for you to parent the children in an easy way. So if you can sort of hack these big things, if you can sort of engineer the environment to help you, then the daily life will be much easier, right? So like if they have friends that are memorizing Quran, it's obviously going to be much easier to follow your Quranic routine compared to if they have friends that are going out to concerts and music events and, things like that. So that social aspect, it's incredibly important, right? And who are your friends with as a family, and who are your children friends with? And again, there's also the impact of your family. Some of you might be converts and some of you might not have practicing families. And again, while keeping with your family is incredibly important, you have to kind of establish the surrogate family. You have to find other people in the community who are going to be supportive of your efforts, your brothers and sisters in Islam, in order for your kids to not feel lonely. Most of my family is not practicing. Now we keep in touch with my family, obviously, and we make dua for them. But at the same time, we have to make connections in the community where my children feel connected to other random uncles and aunts in the community, where they feel supported and where they have that social circle and their environment is healthy in that sense, right? A big piece of the puzzle here with the social aspect is their schooling. So if your kids are going to schools where they're exposed to things that are not according to your values, that's going to be a huge battle, right? And so this is where homeschooling comes in, partially. But also, if you're not able to homeschool, you can look at Islamic schools. You can look at schools with lesser evil, so to speak. You can look at schools maybe that are more academic, if there is, bad behavior or, gang activity in the area. And I'm saying this, because a lot of the Muslims in the West and in the East have similar struggles, right? And so you have to consider all these factors that are having an impact on your children, right? Like, what is their social circle? If you send your kids to an international school where the crowd is mostly non-Muslim, it's very difficult to expect from your children, a Sahaba level behavior, right? So you have to also be fair. Like, it's your job as a parent to make the conditions easier for your children, right? Like, when you have a garden and you're planting something, you as a gardener are responsible for the conditions. You cannot yell at the plant for not growing when the conditions are not right, right? And so it's your duty as a parent to establish responsibilities, to establish the conditions for your children to thrive in. And big part of that is schooling, because a lot of it comes from, their social life will be dependent on who they're spending their days with. And so if they're spending 6 to 8 hours a day in an environment that's not conducive to their values and to the way you want them to develop, that it's time to look into something else. Like, it's time to look into options. And again, I speak here from experience, not just as a homeschooler, but even as a teenager myself. I was growing up in Germany and I was attending a non-Muslim school. You know, I was having non-Muslim friends. And again, my family not being very practicing, but they were still more traditional than the local German families. And so my mom insisted that I attend this Bosnian after-school program where I would connect with my culture and my traditions, and I would learn the language and I would learn the history and, you know, whatever was connected. And initially I did not like it, but that exposure helped me connect better with my culture, right? And so if you have no choice in terms of, you know, let's say your government school that's near down the street and you have to attend, again, some laws in Europe are like that, then you maybe can engineer that environment for after school activities. You can send them to the local madrasa, you can send them to the afternoon program, you can create something, you can create an environment that's going to make your children feel more welcome and where they're going to be feeling seen with their needs, and they're not going to be the only ones, right? So we have the big picture, we have the society and the culture where we live in, and then second picture is their social life, like their family and their friends. That includes schooling and their after-school activities. And this is an important part I don't want to miss with after-school activities. We as parents are the one who give them an appetite for these things, right? And so a 4-year-old doesn't really know what they want to do, but if we put them in an activity, we're giving them an appetite for that, right? And so if we enroll them in an activity, be it sports, be it maybe music classes or something, like, we are going to be responsible for these kind of things later on down the, you know. And so, for example, even things like gymnastics classes, okay, might not be a big deal when your child is young, but then, you know, as the girls move into preteen years or teenage years, you know, it becomes inappropriate, right? And we are the ones who gave them the appetite for these things. So maybe we can look for other activities that are going to be more aligned with our values, right? And same thing if we're putting them into team sports. We have to look at what kind of team culture. Is there a drinking culture? Is there a dating culture? What kind of impact is that going to have? Like, if your little Yusuf or Muhammad starts, you know, being on a baseball team, but what kind of effect is this going to have on his social life later on as a teenager when all his friends are hanging out together? And so all these things are kind of things that we give them an appetite for as parents. So we can be very mindful, you know, what kind of activities are we enrolling them in? Is this bringing them closer to Allah? Is this going to, you know, be an intentional thing for our family? So all these kind of things are really, really important to consider. And this is something you can engineer. This is something you can create for your family, right? So big picture was the society and the culture. Then the second part is the social kind of environment. And then the third picture, or the third point finally, is the foundation, is your home, right? It's your environment in your home. And so even in situations where you cannot control these other things, right? Let's say you're in a position you cannot move, you're tied with your visa, with your job situation, you cannot change the society where you're at, you cannot change your social situation, you cannot change your school, you cannot, I mean, I'm just giving you here the worst case scenarios. It's always possible to do something, but let's say the two other points, you cannot do anything about them. You still have a high degree of control and freedom within your own home, how you arrange your own home. So you could be in the worst area, but you could still have a peaceful environment in your home if you're intentional about it, right? Like, you could be in the worst possible conditions, but you can still create that environment of loving atmosphere in your home. You can control what comes in and out as far as technology. You have the say in your family, what kind of games you let your kids play. You can engineer their environment, what kind of shows they're watching. So I remember many years back, one sister, she told me like her kids were not interested in any Islamic cartoons. They found them very boring. This is many years ago, like we're talking here 20 years ago, when there wasn't much out there. But she was saying how her kids did not like to watch any of the Islamic programs because they were used to watching all these other fast-paced shows, right? And so this is a clear one, right? Don't let them watch these other kind of things, right? And so this is something you can control within your home, right? You can control what kind of toys they bring in. You can, or you're the one who's buying it, right? As a parent, you can control what kind of food they're eating here. And when I say control here, I don't mean it in a negative sense, but I'm saying it in a sense of responsibility, that you as a parent, you have the power in your home to decide on how things are going to be, right? And so even if you lived in the worst area, you can still shut that door and you can still have a peaceful haven in your own home where you are creating a good environment. And that might be the thing that saves your children, right? That they have a safe place to retreat to. So if you cannot affect all these other things, you can simplify your environment. You can make your home beautiful. You can make your home calming. You can play games with your children, instead of just yelling at them. You can spend some time doing some crafts with them or whatever it is that you want to establish as your family culture, right? But that's going to help raise your kids as practicing Muslims, inshallah, because you are kind of dealing with all these things one step at a time, right? So you have the big things you should be working towards, but then you also have the small things, that you can their room, what kind of clothing they're wearing. Are they wearing t-shirts with, music bands on them? Are they listening to music? Do they have free access to devices? Are they watching shows that are inappropriate for them? That's all within your home, right? Those are all the things that can be affected, right, through you as a parent, like, regardless of where you live. There was a time where I was a refugee in the 90s because of the Bosnian War, and I lived in a refugee camp with a lot of people, and my family only had one bedroom. Like, we had only one room in a building of other people. We had a shared kitchen, we had a shared bathrooms. It was a refugee camp, right? But my family, for example, they made sure to sign me up for a library, I think within the first week we were there. And so we were getting books from the library just so, there was a bit of peace in that room. Like, we could not control the outside environment. We could not control what kind of kids and people were outside in the refugee camp. But in that room we were in, I remember doing math problems with my sister and reading books from the library, right? So my parents, or my mom at the time, she was engineering that environment for me to be educational and, for it to be safe, right? And so no matter where you are, there is something you can do. And once you kind of take care of these environmental factors, the day-to-day struggle is reduced, right? A lot of times parents ask me, well, what about, when their friends are asking them to go places? What about when they ask for inappropriate things at home and all these kind of things? This can all be taken care of by this bigger picture, right? By this bigger picture. If you take care of the environment you live in, if you take care of the school or education your kids are in, or their activities, if they're friends with, if they're going to in a school where the kids are doing inappropriate things, it becomes a daily battle. But if they are in an environment where they're hanging out with good children, chances are, again, there's no guarantees, like as we mentioned before, we do our best and outcome is with Allah, but all these things are going to make your daily parenting much, much easier, right? So if you can have these three areas of your life and you can evaluate them for yourself, what can I do now to make things easier on myself so this parenting is not a daily battle, right? And so I hope this helps, inshallah, and I'll talk to you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.